Okay, so we are at number 8. Let's do this. So we're starting chapter 5. It's the 29th of March, 2010, and we're starting with Pagan. Sipping an early morning coffee, Pagan stared at the computer monitor. Clicking through her personal photographs, she spent less than a second on each image. Joining the internet social network site 4 years prior, the site had become an addiction. Uploading about 900 photographs and adding over 1,000 friends, many of them witches, Pagan found that she wasted at least 1 hour a day on it. An acquaintance had died the year before, and his page had become a memorial. His death far outreached the expected grief parameters. She still enjoyed reading his comments. It was as if somehow he was still alive. Pagan clicked on her main page, adding a new status. She typed, "Today I am grateful for technology," in the belief that if she said it enough, it might actually happen. Within a few seconds, a friend liked it. A text message broke her concentration. It was from John. He was waiting at the front door, impatiently waiting, Pagan assumed. Drinking the rest of the coffee, she grabbed the blue plastic bag that contained chocolate Easter eggs out from the top cupboard in the kitchen and headed to the front door, tiptoeing past Demeter's and Deity's bedroom. Opening the door, the cold morning breeze made her nipples erect. Wearing only a black nightie, she blushed from embarrassment. After all, John was now a stranger to her. The children were only a business arrangement. Carefully handing John the plastic bag, she crossed her arms to hide her breasts. He grabbed it and awkwardly focused his attention on the flaking weatherboard cladding. This angered Pagan, who was proud of her ageing home. John's partner, Michelle, sat in the front seat of John's car, which idled in the driveway. That also annoyed Pagan. Michelle waved, and Pagan waved back, and John hovered. Pagan had wanted contact with him to be swift. He was not her enemy, but the mere sight of him brought back memories she'd rather forget. Pagan leaned on the door front. "What is it, John?" Struggling to find the right words, he screwed his face up. Is it the kids?" John looked back at the car for encouragement. Michelle smiled at him. Turning back to face Pagan, John finally spoke. "I was wondering if you could have a word with Demeter about his bad dreams." Confused, Pagan replied, "What bad dreams?" So now we're going to Faceline. Lounging in the warm and cozy bed, Faceline chuckled as she heard Oscar playing the banjo in the dining area. Laughter from the twins only encouraged him to play louder. Faceline looked out the window. Winter was fast approaching and many of the garden's deciduous trees had not yet lost their leaves, hanging on until the first torrential rainfall. In a dream some time ago, Faceline had walked through a large open planned home. Burnt orange walls combined with dark blue feature wall. The floor was highly glossed, and in the middle of the kitchen, lounge room and dining room, a large tree trunk supported the roof. The following morning, she had sat down and drawn up the plan. 2 years later, after living in a small shed, they moved into their newly built home. Large windows without curtains allowed for natural light, and an organic tranquility enveloped the house. A dream had become a reality. Turning onto her back, Faceline struggled to find motivation. She could easily stay in bed and stare at the surrounding garden for another hour. Grinning, Oscar appeared at the bedroom door holding his banjo. "Shall I play for you, my dear?" She laughed. "Please don't. There is only so much torture a witch can tolerate before she turns you into a frog." He was wearing only green shorts, and Faceline admired her husband's body. Short in stature, he had remained taut and physically strong. His once hairless chest now glistened grey. Sitting up, she asked him to sit with her. Obediently, he placed the banjo at the end of the bed and climbed in beside her. They snuggled. "Where are the girls?" Oscar teased. "Tied to the clothesline." She pinched his bicep. How about we have a quickie before the girls finish their breakfast?" he gestured. Wanting to please him, she kissed him on his dry, cold lips. Since the chemotherapy, her libido had vanished. Even herbal concoctions had not helped. The doctor explained to her that it was completely normal and that her libido would come back eventually. They had not made love in 6 months. Oscar was a considerate man, but for how long? Pulling back from her, Oscar spoke. Oh, I forgot to tell you, Ma and Pa are happy to have the kids while we were at Samhain. Samhain was Oscar's favourite weekend escape, and he would most likely pack his travel bag several days before the annual festival. He loved the sexiness of the Samhain. I'm always pronouncing that wrong, so you can correct me in the comments, as it combines elements of the Beltane fertility ritual, which was being celebrated in the Northern Hemisphere at the same time. Australian witches celebrated the coming winter by gathering in a mass at the Samhain festival, which was being held in Tasmania this year. What a coincidence. Frowning, she replied, I better get busy making the strega then. Faisaline looked forward to her cup of strega as well. Once a year, she would drink this narcotic drink with Oscar. It helped rekindle their love and their sexual appetite for each other. Maybe a double dose this year. The coming down effect lasted for a few days, but it was well worth the withdrawals. A spoon fell, clanging on the floorboards, alerting them that breakfast was finished. Oh shit, I better get back to the twins. Oscar sprung out of bed, grabbing the banjo and twanged it. Twang! Faisaline slowly stood up out of bed. You are juvenile. Morgana. Walking quickly to school, Morgana was out of breath by the time she reached the entrance. Hensley's car was not parked out the front or in the school car park, which was unusual. Ringing and texting over half a dozen times over the weekend, Morgana finally rang Hensley's landline, only to be greeted by Ruby, who had simply lied about Hensley's whereabouts. Ruby's quivering voice had repeated every question Morgana had asked if she was stalling to reply. Something was not right. Surely Hensley would come to school. The only time Hensley had taken time off school since kindergarten was when her father died, and although grief-stricken, she was back only several days after the funeral. Perhaps Hensley had been dropped off to school by Ruby. Morgana walked down 2 sets of stairs and into the dungeon locker room, stopping at Hensley's locker. She would wait. Students collecting their school books soon dispersed into the classrooms. Another 5 minutes passed. The school bell would ring soon. Pulling out a hairpin from behind her ear, Morgana inserted it into Hensley's padlock, wiggling it until she finally unlatched. Yanking out a jumper that Hensley left inside her locker, Morgana held it against her nose. It smelled of Red Door perfume, Hensley's favourite. Clearing her mind, she visualised Hensley in hope she could tune into Hensley's thoughts. Hensley was tall with a slender, almost bony body. Her long and slender feet were too long for her stick legs, and due to her foot size, she only ever wore thongs, as other shoes exaggerated the actual appearance of her feet. Hensley, who was not only smart and beautiful, was also dogmatic and proud. The bell rang. The late arriving students fled to class, leaving Morgana alone in the locker room. She was late for sociology, but finding Hensley was more important. Texting Hensley once again, Morgana sat down on the cold cement floor and waited for a reply. 15 minutes later, Hensley walked into the locker room wearing jeans, a grey skivvy, and a dark green beanie as if a winter had arrived early. Jumping up from the floor, Morgana wrapped her arms around Hensley. I've been worried about you all day. Hensley ignored Morgana's theatrics. Morgana hit her on the arm. What the hell happened at the Witch Awakening? Hensley threw her bag into the locker. Desperate for attention, Morgana placed her palm on Hensley's shoulder. Swinging around, Hensley pushed Morgana backwards. Don't touch me. Emily. Cocking her head to the side to showcase her long swan neck, Emily confidently replied to the customer's request. Up until now, no one had noticed her employer's absence. Emily pitied the woman, who was as short as she was wide, with a mouth that housed too many teeth. It amazed her that humans procreated so often, considering their limited supply of worthy partners. Humans certainly were Earth's sexually transmitted disease. The customer also held her stare for too long. Had this woman been socialised? Emily wanted to flick her in the forehead. Retailers sure did have their fair share of crazies to deal with it. Composed, Emily answered, she's having some time off. She should be back maybe next week. Satisfied with the reply, the customer picked up the previously purchased bouquet of 6 red roses from the counter and wobbled out of the shop. Waiting until the woman was clearly out of sight, Emily unlocked the office door where her employer slept in the office chair with a blanket tucked around her. She shut the door behind her. The doorbell would alert her if anyone walked into the shop. Unscrewing the lid off the small brown bottle marked Sleeping Beauty, Emily poured a few more drops of sleeping potion down her employer's neck. Concerned she had to increase the dosage each day for the desired effect, she feared her employer was desensitizing to the potion. Perhaps drugging her employer so frequently was not such a good idea, especially now people were noticing her absence. She was looking surprisingly younger for her sleep though. So I'm just going to write down 95. Her absence. She was looking surprisingly younger for her sleep though. Her skin had softened the dark rings around her eyes. And when she woke each day, although concerned she had slept all day again and that her neck was stiff, she was much more pleasant to talk to. Surely her husband had noticed the difference. Emily poured some extra sleep potion down her throat, put the lid back on the bottle and slipped it back into her pocket. Sleep, bitch. Locking the office door behind her, Emily danced over to the counter. Spread over it was material to perform a love spell. A pink candle, a cocktail stick, a strip of paper, assorted ribbons, and a length of spindlewood. Did she really want a man she had to bewitch, or was he worth surrendering? And was he worth surrendering her celibacy for? Visualizing the way his jeans sat on his ass and the way his smile lit up his eyes, Amy's heart raced. She was in lust with him, that was for sure. That man is fine. She scanned the materials in front of her. Gathering it all up, she threw them into a cardboard box. Why did she want an innocent love spell when a sex spell would be much better? The supreme femininity would not suppress desire, surely. So now we're moving on to Pagan. Turning the heat pump up, Pagan changed out of her work clothes and into pajamas. Entering the kitchen, she made a peppermint tea to fill the empty void in her stomach. Finally resting on the couch, she flicked through the newspaper tray, pulling out an out-of-date celebrity magazine. The sound of the clock ticking affected her ability to concentrate, and only a few minutes later, she threw the magazine down onto the floor. Pagan rubbed her eyes and then curled up on the couch and surrendered to sleep. She heard the mobile phone beep at 10 o'clock. Looking at the message, she was not disappointed. It woke her as if it was exactly what she needed. Replying to him, she rolled over and drifted back off to sleep. Henry knew where the spare keys was hidden. He knew the routine. Fuck buddies seemed the most sensible option for a 33-year-old witch who did not want a relationship but still harbored strong sexual desires. And she had trained him well in the last 6 months. Number 1 rule, and most important, do not fall in love. Love was not an option. Love with sex was great, but sex with lust came in a close second. Playing the unavailable character kept the male species interested. It worked a treat. Most men were easily manipulated. Nearly every man Pagan had ever slept with had fallen in love with her. The smart ones had just kept quiet about it. Henry was different. He had only just turned 18 and was half-cocked and arrogant in his youth. The internet had raised an eager but lazy Generation Y. Their sexual exploration was based on internet porn available to them at a young age, leaving them sexually deviant before they had even kissed a girl. Henry had wanted to explore anal and sexual fetishes before he'd even experienced the basics. Pagan explained to him that there was a necessary process of sexual engagement that even strangers had to abide by. Slow down, Henry. Enjoy the dance. Young men wanted to be 40, while middle-aged men acted 20. Pagan had dated 40-year-old men who often mentally attacked her in a response to their lack of erection. Easily threatened by her sexual prowess, she disposed of the men quickly. Meeting Henry at a party, Pagan had sensed immediately that he was emotionally wounded. Her fetish for emotionally unavailable males had intensified. Crazies made uninhibited lovers. Sleeping with an insecure man annoyed her. If he could not lose himself in the moment, then he was quickly replaced with a man who could. Unemotional men had nothing to lose. Sex was an art form for Pagan. Romanticism and abstract style melted into a dark pit of self-mutilation and conscious emotional betrayal on a plywood canvas. At best, sex was imitant Frank Bernard Dixie's painting of Romeo and Juliet in 1884, a romantic collage of uninhibited sexual urges, faithfulness and youthful ignorance. And at worst, sex was graphic graffiti on the Berlin Wall. In between both extremes were a sickness called self-hatred. Growing up in a rich conservative household, Henry hankered for sexual liberation, not just in his mind, but physically as well. He was ripe, needy, and eager to learn. He'd been an astute student. Concerned with his age, Pagan rejected his initial advances. Equally annoyed that he had poked her on Facebook, she had sent him an inbox, "Try harder." Several hours later, he replied, "I couldn't get any harder, so when am I coming over you?" His reply infuriated and intrigued her. Generation Y certainly was straight to the point. She had decided to train him in the hope he might teach the other boys a few pointers. The back door creaked. Smelling Henry's scent, Pagan hopped off the couch and walked over to greet him. Is it too much to ask you to shower before you visit me? She smelt his girlfriend. He had just had sex with her. Perfume, vaginal juices and saliva still coated his erect penis. Smiling, he replied, "Hey, cougar, isn't little Miss Vanilla doing it for you anymore?" Slowly lifting his top to reveal a very firm upper body, he waited for Pagan to praise his physique. The boy was magnificent, but she was not about to tell him that. His ego was inflated enough. Dropping his trousers, he waited again for her to praise him. Unamused by the boring sexual ritual, he yawned. He wanted instant gratification, and she was a tough taskmaster. After all, she had witnessed the male sexual ritual over 10,000 times, and after a while it all seemed rather tedious and cliche. If only men would get over themselves. She ushered him to follow her to the bedroom, stripping her clothes off as they walked, and by the time they reached the bedroom door, she was naked. Laying down on the doona, she spread her legs. He was not repulsed by her hairy genital bush and underarms. There was something wild about Pagan, and he loved it. She was sexier than any girl his age. She was sexier than any woman he'd ever seen. Long black hair with her dark blue eyes and freckled skin shaped her long face. Her chunky thighs, large hips, chubby tummy and smaller breasts aroused him. Like a trained dog, he walked to her expecting a treat, but brushing his blonde hair off his face, he hesitated. Only 20 minutes before, he had left his girlfriend's parents' home where they'd spent the night playing a game of Uno, depending on where you come from, managing a missionary-style quickie in his girlfriend's bedroom before he left. He had been the dominant person. Now he was staring at an alpha female who liked it hardcore, and she did not like to be disappointed. The safety code was green apple, which was hard to say with a sock in your mouth, so a double tap sufficed. They had not used either yet. Sitting beside her on the bed, he placed his middle finger abruptly into her dry vagina. With the other hand, he opened and pushed up her flaps. Slowly, he licked her clitoris until her vagina lubricated. She had shown him to not just part her flaps, but to lift her skin, which lifted her clitoris. It intensified her orgasm. His long middle finger pushed further in and tilted up. As he pressed on his G-spot, Pagan arched. She had shown him where her G-spot was as well. A surge of aggression flooded her body, pinching her nipples. He made sure it hurt. She did not flinch. Pagans enjoyed giving and receiving pain. Pagan rewarded him by reaching down and grabbing his penis. He stopped to enjoy the pleasure. Slapping him across his face, he wilted quickly. She had not given him permission to stop. It was not the first time she had slapped him into submission. In retaliation, he pushed hard up into her vagina. Choking on her breast, she smiled at him. Good boy. His youthful body laid on top of her, and in one smooth move, he grabbed the ropes tied to the bed, twisting then quickly around both her wrists. Submissive was the sexual turn on for Pagan. Submissiveness was the sexual turn on for Pagan. Plunging his penis into her vagina, she arched her back and held her breath. He knew how she liked it hard. So hard sometimes he thought he might tear her in half, but still she asked for more. He clasped one hand around her neck and squeezed until she could not breathe. His other hand slid down over her waist, grabbing her right buttock, raising her bottom so he could enter her more deeply. Biting her shoulder, he quickly tasted blood. He bit her again, this time ripping her flesh. Ejaculated, he covered her stomach in semen. Wriggling out of the ropes, Pagan flipped him onto his back and mounted him. He grinned at her. She slapped the other side of his face with the back of her hand. "Don't fucking smile at me." Scratching at his chest, picking up his skin in a clump, his blood bubbled up onto the surface. She licked his blood. He grabbed her hips, but Pagan slapped him again. "I'll tell you when you can touch me." Obediently, he let go of her, placing both his hands smugly behind his head. Looking into his eyes, she asked, "Tell me what you want." He did. "Tell me again." "I want you, Pagan." "Again." "I want you, Pagan." Pagan felt the explosion propel up from her clitoris and through her head. Her ears deafened as senses numbed, and then she felt it. The emptiness. It was always there. It was time for Henry to go home. Now we're moving on to Demeter, or Demeter, however I want to say it when I'm saying it. Tiptoeing across the hallway, through the lounge room and up a set of stairs into another hallway, he entered his father's bedroom, but only Michelle slept in the king-size bed. Not sure if he should wake her, Demeter considered going to day at his room and hopping into bed with her until the morning. Sensing a dark figure beside the bed, Michelle sat up, turning the lamp on. Groggy from being woken, she snapped at her stepson. "What are you doing out of bed?" His voice trembled. "He's back again, Michelle. He's in my room." Michelle glanced at the alarm clock. It was 2 a.m. Why was John not home from work yet? "For fuck's sake," Michelle said under her breath. She could see that Demeter was generally frightened, but she'd only just drifted off to sleep and would be rising at 6 a.m. Jumping out of bed, she threw her peach-coloured chiffon dressing gown over her pyjamas and ushered Demeter to follow her back to his room. Hesitantly, he followed. Turning each room's light on as she walked through the house, she considered ringing John. She loved Demeter, but she was out of her league dealing with a mysterious dark figure. Not having children of her own, she struggled with how best to deal with Demeter's wild imagination. John had certainly thrown her into the deep end when he asked her to move in with them 6 months ago. Wanting to hold Michelle's hand, Demeter shadowed closely behind her. Secretly, he hoped that the man was still standing in the corner of his room, so finally Michelle would believe him. Michelle entered the downstairs hallway, flicking the light on. Real or not, she was not about to walk through the house unprepared. She suddenly stopped at Demeter's bedroom doorway. Demeter comically ran into the back of her. Had she not been apprehensive, she would have laughed. Peering into his room, her eyes darted across the darkened room. All the bedroom corners were clear of any dark figures. Grabbing Demeter's hands, she pulled him in front of her. He resisted moving forwards. "Can you see him, Demeter?" Like a cautious emu, he pushed his head away from his body. Looking inside his room, he studied the darker spots. Relieved they all appeared empty, he turned his light on and ran to his bed. Michelle tucked him back in. "Would you like me to keep the light on?" He nodded. Michelle, will you stay with me for a while?" Accepting of her sleepless night, she nodded. "Move over, Spunky. If I'm staying, I might as well get comfy." Demeter moved over, allowing Michelle to squeeze onto the single bed. She lay on top of the covers while he snuggled in underneath them. Her head leaned on her arm and her feet hung over the edge. She could easily fall back to sleep. He liked Michelle. She was vastly different to his mum, but she seemed to make his dad happy. "Hey, Demeter, tell me about the man." Demeter curled up, pulling the covers up above his nose. His eyes widened. Shaken up by the ghostly visitation, he glanced every few minutes across the room. I heard my name and woke up, and the man was standing over there. Poking his index finger out from the covers, he pointed to the corner opposite them. What does he do when he notices you're looking at him? Michelle noticed Demeter shivered as he thought about it. Regardless of if it was a nightmare or something supernatural, Demeter was frightened. He just stands there looking at me. Demeter hid further down into the covers. Only the top of his eyes peered out from the safety of the bed covers. Except for his blue eyes, Demeter looked like his father. His hair was darkening and he was starting to lose his childhood chubbiness. In a few years, Demeter would be a handsome teenager. Deity, however, did not look like John or Pagan. Michelle had brought up her observations several times with John, who had quickly changed the subject. Tell me what the man looks like again, Demeter. Pulling the covers down to his chin, his eyes darted across the room again. He wears a long black cloak and a large hat like what the olden day men used to wear. Yawning, Michelle interrupted. Top hat? No, she guessed again. Bowler hat? I think so. He drew the shape of the bowler hat with his index finger. Michelle nodded. He has no eyes, but I know he's looking at me, and he's really tall. Looking for a sensible explanation, Michelle interrupted him again. Do you think you might have watched something like that on television? Thinking about it for a while, he replied, Don't know, maybe. Does he look like a ghost? An adrenaline rush surged through Demeter's veins. Maybe Michelle was starting to believe him. No, he is solid black. I can't see through him. Michelle shook her head. Her eyes were closing. Several seconds later, she drifted off to sleep. Demeter stared at the corner opposite him until he, too, drifted off to sleep. I'm just going to see how long this next one is. And then, because, it takes, if I can read it in 3 minutes. Right, we're with Peony. Oh, this is very heavy too. Peony woke to Carl brushing his hand along the inside of her thigh. His hand was soft from obsessive moisturising, and it slid easily underneath her flannelette nightie, resting in between her legs. Cringing, she asked him to stop. Carl, I'm trying to sleep. It was only weeks before that she had healed herself from the affliction. Ignoring her, he grabbed at her underwear, pulling them to the side. Quietly responding, she moved further away from him, pushing his hand away. Carl, I'm not in the mood. Angry, Carl pounced on top of Peony, grabbing both her wrists with one hand. So like that, forcing them behind her head. The heaviness of his body pinned her underneath him and caved her chest in. With one hand, he removed his boxer shorts. She did not struggle. This was not the first time he had used aggression during the 16 years of marriage. Carl thought it was Peony's duty as his wife to submit to his sexual needs, and to keep the peace, she often submitted. It never occurred to Peony to question it. She spent most of her time actively trying to avoid it by offering him another beer so that he could pass out. Working in Western Australia meant that their sexual encounters occurred less often, and this made her happy. Carl had always enjoyed porn, young female porn mostly. His fetish for shaven pussies in a school uniform repulsed her. During sex, he would make her say, "Oh, Daddy, give it to me." It was demoralising. He often demanded that Peony watch porn with him and then act out the scene. But since his new employment, his sexual demands had worsened, and at times Peony had feared for her life. The bondage ropes were tightening, and his desire to reduce her to tears intensifying. Past terrifying altercations had taught her to not reject Carl sexually. He was quick to temper and enjoyed using cruelty to make her subservient. Complying with his sexual needs meant that it was over quickly and any danger drastically reduced. Pulling her underwear to the side again, he pushed his penis inside her vagina. Unlubricated, she swelled. Never having children and only ever having one sexual partner meant Carl had great pleasure claiming that he had sovereignty over her pussy. Wiggling on top of her, he buried her hawk-looking face into her neck. Saliva dribbled down onto her hair, and within a few minutes of him groaning, he ejaculated. Hearing the woeful sound of Carl finishing was better than any orgasm. It meant it was over, and over was great. Rolling off her, he left her underwear lodged into the crest of her groin and a wet spot beneath her bottom. Chafing from the underwear, she had bled a little. Unsure what to do, she turned over onto her side and closed her eyes. The morning sun was just breaking through the bedroom curtains. Having to start the day with marital rape was not what she had wanted, but it's what she was used to. Pretty heavy. Apologies. When you read it again, when I wrote it, it comes from passion, and it comes from a place of absolute disgust with the way that people treat each other, particularly sexually. I've forgotten where we started today. So I'm just there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about anyway. So I think I'll just go to those spots. So with Pagan and her sexual needs, she, as we know, she's living in the past, she's not moving into the future. She's getting to that stage now where she is so disconnected from her own sexual needs that she's extremely attacking herself in ways of violence, and because she's feeling so violated and traumatized on the inside. So she's doing that to other people. She's got this young man that she can manipulate, and he's too arrogant and too keen to see that it's toxic and it's awful and that she's abusing his body. But on the flip side, he's wanting her to do that because he's getting off on it. You know, as a single girl, I'm trying not to give too much of my own personal personal experiences, but I'm writing from a place of I know, and so, you know, it's, you know, these are elements, so once again, of where I've come from, where I've been, you know, I've lost my sexuality in it, and you go looking for it in really weird places with really bad people, because, you know, if you're in a healthy space, you're going to attract healthy people. So if you're not, you're attracting, you know, terrible people to some extent. So you can see that there's a lot of violence, but she can't seem to find the satisfaction in the sexual experiences that she's having. So Demeter's little story where he's being visited by an entity, and the entity is causing him not to sleep well. They think it's nightmares when in fact he's telling the truth. And I just love Michelle. I love her character because she loves her partner. She just loves John, and she's not a mum, but she's taken on 2 older children. You know, they're still young enough to let her in, but she's come in when they're all a little bit inflicted. You know, so Demeter, you know, she's just been thrown into the mix, and lots of women know what that feels like, and lots of men, you know, they've been thrown into parenthood as well. So, you know, she's not quite sure what she's doing, but she's trying her best. Now, as most of you would know if you watch, you know, the horror movies, I'm explaining the tall man. But as a child, I was visited by spirits. And I had a mother who, instead of saying, oh, that's just your imagination, sweetheart, she would actually say, oh, tell me more about that. And in particular, there was a very tall man that came to me. He stood beside my bed, and he never said anything to me. He just stared at me, and he did have a bowler hat on. And I was just a really scared child. I used to look into the darkness, and I would see snakes, and I would see spiders, and they looked super real to me. And as I became an adult, I started to experience sleep paralysis. I've had it happen 3 times to me, and it's an interesting phenomenon. You know, the scientists believe that it is that we do it. It's a panic response. I don't know, because I've been very panicked my entire life, and why is it just on 3 occasions that this has occurred? So if you don't know what I'm talking about, specifically for how it happened to me, is that 3 times I've been woken by some noise from my left side of the room, where it's gone like, Joe, or you know, it's ruffled, and I've woken, and it's almost in that moment of waking that the pinning occurs, and it's like your whole body is paralyzed. Your brain is frantic. It feels very awake. It's taking in everything possible around it, but the body is in paralysis. So, but there is an extremely heaviness, and it doesn't it doesn't feel internal. That's the funny thing. It doesn't feel like your body on the inside is paralyzing out. It feels like someone has leaped onto your chest and pushed you down. Now, in one of those moments, I actually was able to turn my head and look directly at my partner, the father of my children at the time, and was trying to speak to him, and I couldn't get it out. And then, of course, it leaves. So you'll see this during my book series, that a lot of the things that I've experienced on a supernatural level is coming into this. So I wanted Demeter to be part of my childhood, where I was frightened to go down the hallway because I felt like someone was coming up behind me. We used to hear people walking up and down the hallway at my home, and even people who would stay that we didn't tell them that there was a presence. They would go, who was walking up and down the hallway in the night? And we go, oh, well, that's just the ghost in the house. So I had a very spooky upbringing. And so, of course, my love of all things scary has, you think I'd want to do the opposite, but I didn't want to do the opposite. I wanted to throw myself more into why some homes are more scary than other homes, why there's activities in one home. So, you know, I've thrown myself into all of the supernatural and the occult stuff, and that's why it's my first love, even though it terrified me as a child. And also, just off topic, but interesting, because I'm thinking about, you know, things that used to scare me as a child. I always felt monitored. And we didn't have monitoring devices in the home. I was growing up in late 70s and the 80s, and there was no TV in my room when I was younger, but I always felt as if I was being watched by, and I used to fantasize that there was a TV in my room and it was watching me, and it was always keeping an eye. So it felt like I was in the public eye. Even as a child, it was like I don't know if I'm doing some sort of self-regulating thing, or that I had tuned in that the future we would be all very monitored, like off our TV screens, off our cameras, off our laptops. So you can say it's all woo-woo, but for me as a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7, you know, I couldn't have made that up. And it wasn't until I got to high school when I read 1984 and Animal Farm by George Orwell that I realized that, you know, that he had sensed the future as well, but he wrote that way back. You know, about the TV in the bedroom, and it was monitoring it. It blew my mind. And I was lucky enough when I went to England that we just happened to walk past one of the homes that he lived in. And it blew my mind. I felt like George Orwell had sent me a message, you know, from the dead side, you know, saying, like, you're on to something, Joe. You felt that this massive surveillance would be coming into our lives. And so it kind of freaks me out that sometimes when I've been writing this book, things happened to my friends that I was writing about, and the energies. So it was a bit scary, because I was like, geez, am I manifesting this in real life? Has this book outgrown its parameters and now is in real, or was I sensing the future and putting it into the book? So it's food for thoughts that, you know, potentially writers are coming from a place of a psyche rather than just an intellect or a creative space. We could be, you know, George Orwell was an amazing absorber of life and an observer of life. So, and he wrote that into his books. And then, of course, you know, now we're seeing Big Brother and the truth behind, you know, we're starting to see us being put in Facebook jail because we've said something that goes along, you know, the parameters of correctness, and we're going to start being limited to what we can and can't say. And so I think for me right now, me doing this, me talking about things right now, is because in 10 years time, I actually may be quietened. And these are things in this book that need to be talked about. And one of them is marital rape. This, just because I am in a committed relationship with you doesn't mean that I'm just going, and women, and you may say I'm a minority, I'm not. This is a discussion that women are always talking about. And potentially this could be happening to men as well. That within relationships, it's just like, it's just this, oh, it's just easier so we don't have a fight attitude. Now, I'm a single girl, and I will probably be single for a very, very long time. I spent most of my adult life as single, which is why I know so much of the sex stuff, because I've gone and explored sexual parameters. and wasn't limited to the one person. So it's got to be discussed. A lot of these things in my book are not to be provocative. They're to be shit. She's talking about it. That's the stuff we're not meant to talk about. We're not meant to talk about that. We're meant to pretend life is grand, do you know, but she's saying it. And I think this is why I've never had the large publishers want my book. I think it's too risque potentially, and also maybe I'm just not a good writer. So, you know, there's lots of reasons I'm not, you know, because they want to make money from there. At the end of the day, they're a business. So the book here, you know, they probably don't see it as very marketable. So of course it's a niche within a niche, you know, but there are huge genres being discussed in this book that I think need to be discussed, and particularly now with the way in which America and the abortion rights that have occurred. This book is more prevalent now than ever, and I wrote it 10 years ago when I was in an angry place, and now it's like shit, like, you know, it's all coming in. So I'll just move forwards. Now, if anyone ever wants to know more about my scary stuff, as I do post it occasionally on my work page, which is Red Room Reiki and Readings on Facebook. I occasionally pop it on there. So I'll finish it there because we've gone over 41. So I'll see you on the next one. Bye.